Hello again, it's Mr. Pete, your internet shop teacher again, and I'm still sitting in front of my little Rhodes 7-inch shaper, and the purpose of this video is just to show you how a shaper should be lubricated. Now this is different than the South Bend that's sitting over there because this does not have a pressurized lubrication system with an oil pump. Everything has to be lubricated either before you start the job, or some of it you can actually add oil as the machine is cutting. So let's take a look at these lubrication points, and this will be a pretty short video, but thanks for joining me. Let's get started. Well, what kind of oil should you use? Well, this is just a good grade of 20 weight non-detergent oil that I got from Napa, and I prefer to use a squirt gun, but you do not need to. Now there's no Git oilers on here. Let's lubricate the ram first of all, because you do not want that to run dry ever. But there are two spots here on each side where we can oil it. I'll zero in on those. There's no Git oilers. Now these are not oilers right here. These are the adjustment screws. And then I like to turn it on, and with the machine running you can actually squirt it, and you can do that on both ends. Now perhaps by zooming in here you can see the oil holes that I was talking about, two on each side. And similarly on this side, also two holes. Now be careful when the machine is running, but sometimes it's handy if you're making a long cut and you want to lubricate the machine to do it in motion. But if you're unsure, turn the machine off, because that can be dangerous. Now this is the main shaft that goes in and turns the bowl gear. Now the bowl gear is the big gear, so there's a Gits oiler right here. Give that a couple shots, and then also there's an oil hole right here on the eccentric. That doesn't really need much oil, but that will press in, and that thing doesn't always pop out. I got to use a little pick to get that to come out. And then looking down near the bottom, this is the pivot point for the rocker arm. So there's an oiler right there. Give that a shot. This is not an oil hole. I don't know what that is. It just goes right into the main crankcase area. Doesn't seem to do anything that I can tell. And now I'm on the other side of the machine, and there is a similar place for that rocker arm pivot right there. Give that a shot of oil from time to time. And looking at from the top here, here's a Gits oiler, and this is the shaft that drives the little pinion gear, which in turn drives the big bowl gear. Now, as I told you in a recent video in this series, someone had converted this machine and put this jack shaft in. There is apparently bearings in there, ball bearings, that are permanently sealed, so we don't need to worry about that. There's a couple of oilers here on the old motor, a couple drops, but do not over oil that. Just once a year is all you need. You don't want that oil getting in on the windings. Now on the top of the ram there's a couple oil holes down there. I will have to hand hold the camera for you to see those. And looking down into the bowels of the machine, a couple drops there and a couple drops there. Safety note, I of course took the belt guard off for the purposes of this video alone. Never operate a machine without a belt guard. Of course, every shaper has a clapper box, so make sure you've got some oil in there and on the pivot, both sides here, because this needs to move very freely. Now there's several parts that need oiling here on the cutting head. And this is kind of like the compound on any lathe, so you want to get some oil on the screw. And then there's a dovetail here. And I'll oil that on either side. I'm not going to move the camera, but I'll oil it over here as well. Now you can back the compound way up if you want also and squirt some oil near the bottom of that dovetail. And when you take this apart or rotate it, be sure and get some oil in there and probably a little bit of oil around here. I'm not sure if that'll get in. Don't over oil the machine so that you have a mess. Now there is a hole here that almost appears to be an oil hole, but when you poke that, it really is coming up against the back of that mechanism. Well, I'll squirt some oil in there for posterity's sake, but I really want to lubricate all of those parts from the other side through the hatch. When you think about it, you need to oil anything that is a moving part on every machine or automobile or whatever. So just use your own discretion. And then we've got a slide here that needs to be oiled. Right here and on the other side of the machine and at the bottom. Down here where you see the tip of my oil can. And then you can move this back and forth, the cross slide, to work the oil in. And several parts to oil here. First of all, there is an oil hole right there. And then some in on the screw. And on this face, squirt a little oil, and then you can wipe that on with your fingers. Same thing for the other side. And I guess I said this, but I want to repeat it. There's a dovetail way down here. So I'm going to squirt that and rub it in a little bit because you have to get the oil up underneath. The entire table assembly moves up and down, so we want oil here, and that's not a dovetail, but it's a slide, and there's a gib in here right where my oil can is touching, and I like to oil in here too and rub it. Oil's cheap. Similarly, I like that word, over here on this side, some oil there, and here on the screw, there's an oil hole right here. Little oil right there, here, and then on the dovetail underneath. What I like about these oil cans, they work good upside down. This is the elevating screw that moves the entire table up and down, so let's have a little oil there. And on the screw itself, and a little bit more down here. Remember, here's the nut or the thread. Now, when I talked about oiling the slide on the other side here where my finger is, I said there was no dovetail because the dovetail is on this side. This machine surface, which I've already oiled, continues the full length of the machine or height of the machine, so I like to oil down here too. And the dovetail continues down there. Even though we probably will never lower the table that far, you don't want the rust to get started any place, especially if you're in an unheated shop. All right, here's some pretty important parts. Can you see that there's an oil hole right here in the sliding shoe? So I want to oil that pretty often. And also these surfaces. And just about anything else that you can get to. Now this is the bowl gear, and that's the spur gear or pinion gear. And you can oil those. I'm not sure what the manual says, but I like to use a good grade of grease on gears. So unplug the machine when you do this. Turning it off isn't good enough. I'm using this thick black grease all-purpose, but I'm using it mainly because it's a world-class lubricant. But put some of that, you're going to get dirty, and rub it on the gears, and then rotate it manually to another spot. I just happen to think this is better than oil. However, in the South Bend they use oil, but it's pumped on constantly with that lubrication system. Well, the belt guard is back on and the hatch is closed and is ready to run. Now, I think I covered all the points that need to be lubricated, but again, as I said, wherever there's a moving part, you need oil, and I didn't talk about the vise, but you know how to oil a vise as well. And I think that about concludes this video on lubricating the Rhodes Shaper. Hope you enjoyed it. This is Tubalcain saying so long, and I'll see you next time.